Thank you for joining me for this mini webinar, How to Read the HuMap. The Hormone and Urinary Metabolites Assessment Profile is a comprehensive profile that might feel cumbersome at first. I want to take some time to walk you through how to read this report. The first page of the HuMap is the summary page. I know it looks busy, but that's because we wanted to provide you with the most relevant markers on the first page. This summary page highlights all of the most clinically actionable information in the report. We determined this based on what is most well researched, as well as speaking to providers who frequently utilize this testing and taking into account the information that they utilize the most. We know that providers tend to have very little time, and our aim was to give you as much information at a glance as possible in the first 2 pages of the report. We'll get to the second page momentarily, but let me start by walking you through the summary page section by section. Important clinically relevant markers are color-coded to represent your patient's unique hormone balance. Dark blue indicates a marker is below the reference range. Red indicates a value is elevated. Light blue through green and yellow is the reference interval. Because it can be functionally important to pay attention when values are trending high or low, we have included areas that correspond to low range and upper range. The same 15 analytes will populate on each half moon, but the placement will be patient dependent. So the markers you'll see here are estradiol, estrone, estriol, as well as the ratio between 4-hydroxyestrone and 2-hydroxyestrone. You'll see progesterone, alpha and beta pregnenolone, and allopregnanolone, the sum of DHEA and DHEAS, testosterone and 5-alpha DHT, cortisol excreted over the course of the day, the cortisone excreted over the course of the day, as well as metabolized cortisol, which is the sum of THF and THE. And you will also see the 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine reported here. You'll also notice that there's a little letter next to each analyte. You'll see here an E and an A, and over here is the key for those. So that corresponds to the neighborhood it belongs to. So for instance, if you saw a P, you'd know to check for progesterone in the progesterone's neighborhood, or maybe the 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine, you could see that you might find more information about that in the oxidation section. So this is a reminder that you can flip into the report to get more information on these various analytes. Now, these same 15 analytes will move around and change colors based on your patient's individual levels. In the estrogen section on the summary page, we highlight the 2-hydroxy, 4-hydroxy, and 16-hydroxy metabolites and how they are being methylated. You can see here we've got phase 1 of the 2-hydroxy and 4-hydroxy pathway, as well as 16-hydroxyestrone, and the way that these are moving into phase 2. We also have bar graphs here on the right. They represent the relationship of the 2, 4, and 16-hydroxyestrone in relationship to each other, because we know that the 2-hydroxy metabolites are generally considered safest, while the 4 have the most potential for DNA damage, and 16-hydroxy metabolites are considered highly estrogenic. This information in the bar graphs is presented in grayscale because colors mean something on the HuMap. Now let's look at this example. The 4-hydroxyestrogens, here you can see red circles on either side of the 4OH. So that means that both 4-hydroxyestrone and 4-hydroxyestradiol are elevated. And if we follow the COMT enzyme, we can see that the estrone of the 4-methoxy metabolites is upper range and the estradiol is low. Now, what this indicates to me is that these are not being methylated very efficiently, and you can see that plays out in that methylation activity on the bottom, the ratio between the 4-methoxyestrone and the 4-hydroxyestrone. Now, I do want to note that the methylation activity seen here is just reflective of the estrones, but in the neighborhood section of the report, we will also see information on estradiol. Now, for further clarification here, when we're looking at these bars that compare the amount of 2, 4, and 16-hydroxyestrone, these dotted lines represent the reference interval, and then the darkest gray area in the middle here is the optimal range. In the corticoid section, cortisol and cortisone are plotted together for quick information about their relationship to one another. Cortisol is the solid line and cortisone the dotted line. You can see, looking at the dial on the left, which reflects 11 beta HSD activity, that this patient favors cortisol. Under normal, unstressed conditions, people tend to favor cortisone. Therefore, I can see at a glance that this patient is favoring cortisol, and I can begin thinking about how there might be inflammation or insulin resistance at play. The cortisol and cortisone reflected in the dial reflect the cortisol day, meaning the 4 points averaged together, in relationship to the cortisone day. This is not comparing cortisol and cortisone metabolites, but actual free cortisol and free cortisone secretion. Now, I do want to note that this graph here is not to scale, and that's because cortisone and cortisol have different reference ranges. This is sort of a magnified view. It allows you to quickly compare the relationship between cortisol and cortisone, but you will want to look at the Corticoids neighborhood page to get detailed information on the actual diurnal pattern of cortisol and cortisone. Now, here are two additional examples of summary page snippets. You can see the patient on the right is favoring cortisol and the patient on the left favoring cortisone. Some of the information that urine testing provides that other mediums can't is the movement of analytes from one to another, which allows us to extrapolate information about enzyme activity. There are three areas highlighted on the summary page. Here we can see 5-alpha reductase activity. Now, 3 different neighborhoods have 5-alpha reductase enzyme activity. This here represents the androgens neighborhood, and that's because that typically tends to be the most problematic. Aromatase activity is looking at the movement of the androgens, testosterone and androstenedione, into the estrogens, estradiol and estrone. So this can give us information about how those androgens are moving into estrogens, and depending on if we're focusing on estrogen levels or androgen levels, it gives us broader information about the impact of those neighborhoods on one another. Then lastly, we have COMT, or methylation activity. So this is looking at just the 4-hydroxy pathway in relationship to the 4-methoxyestrone pathway. This is typically the most problematic, according to the research. And so this is giving us information about the ability of this patient to methylate and keep themselves safe from the DNA damaging potential that those hydroxy metabolites might have. This patient is favoring methoxyestrone, so that is a good finding. They're methylating well. Now, page 2 of the report shows the entire steroid hormone cascade, which again is color-coded based on your patient's results. So at a glance, you can see which hormone neighborhoods are hotter or colder. So let me emphasize the neighborhoods for you. You can see here we've got the progesterones, the corticoids, the androgens, and the estrogens. And here we have 3 different patients, each with colors that correspond to their individual highs and lows. Then the report moves into the neighborhoods, the estrogens, corticoids, progesterones, and androgens. Again, these are heat mapped, meaning color-coded, to show the patient's own highs and lows. So we'll start with the progesterones neighborhood. You can see here in the progesterones neighborhood, as well as every other neighborhood, that the data is shown here at the top in graphical form, and then it's also laid out with the analytes listed line by line. So you can see the names of the tested hormones here on the left. You can see that there is a numerical result given for each marker, and then it's plotted on a histogram, so you can see where it falls in relationship to the reference interval, which is listed here on the right. The reference interval incorporates green as well as light blue and yellow, and then of course dark blue and red are considered to be outside of the reference interval. Reference ranges are based on menopausal status. So for females, there's pre and post. For males, there are 2 ranges. The first is ages 12 to 39, and the second is age 40 and up. And in addition to testing various metabolites, you'll also see ratios and calculations reported here. oftentimes the relationships between analytes is more informative than just knowing data about an individual analyte, and so that information is reported here. In the corticoids neighborhood, you can see the graphs up above show the actual diurnal pattern of the cortisol and cortisone. Now, please note that the high point for the day in urine is reflected in the second collection. This is somewhat analogous to the AM30 in saliva. It's the highest point of cortisol secretion in a 24-hour period. There's about a 2-hour delay for cortisol levels to show up in urine. And also keep in mind that levels in urine also reflect an average of all of the urine that is pooled in the bladder since the previous void. The waking sample is a reflection of overnight secretion. If the patient collected a nighttime urine sample, it's added to the AM sample, and that data is reflected in the waking value. The androgens neighborhood gives us information about DHEA and DHEAS, which are the active and storage forms. So you can see those here, and then we can track movement into androstenedione, testosterone, and then on into 5-alpha DHT or dihydrotestosterone. This, of course, is testosterone's primary metabolite that's often the culprit behind things like acne, hirsutism, prostate enlargement, and male pattern baldness, whether you've got a male or a female patient. Now, the ratios and calculations section that you see here provide some important information. So it's in this area that I can see information on the sum of DHEA and DHEAS. So that's essentially giving me the active and potential DHEA. I can see information on 5-alpha versus 5-beta reductase activity. This is calculated by looking at androsterone's relationship to ethylanolone. So androsterone is driven, here it is, it's driven by the 5-alpha enzyme, and the ethylanolone is driven by 5-beta. So we can look at those in relationship to see if the patient is favoring alpha or beta metabolism. If they're favoring alpha, of course, they have more of a propensity to move testosterone into 5-alpha DHT and exhibit some of those symptoms that we listed earlier, the acne, the hirsutism, the prostate enlargement, the baldness, etc. This 5-alpha and 5-beta ratio is also the same one that is listed in the key relationships on the summary page. The last ratio in this section is the testosterone to epitestosterone ratio, and elevations in this ratio are typically seen with testosterone supplementation more frequently in males. Now, here we are in the estrogens neighborhood. And so you can see here, I'm also bringing down this little snippet from the summary page. So I wanted to include this so you can see how some of the information that we highlight on the summary page, you can get a little bit more detailed information about it in the neighborhood section of the report. So for instance, the methylation activity that's reported here, I indicated that this is just the estrogens. So let's look here at methylation activity. If we look in our ratios and calculations section here, I think this is a very valuable section. You can see we've got 4 lines, the 2-methoxyestrone to 2-hydroxyestrone, 2-methoxyestradiol to 2-hydroxyestradiol, and the same for estrone. So those estrone values here, not methylating very well in this example, while the estradiol values are actually methylating within the reference interval. They don't always move in parallel, which has been an interesting observation. But on the off chance that your patient may show green on the front page and blue on the back, you always want to check this neighborhood page to check all 4 analytes. But at a glance, the estrone, as I said, is the most well-researched, and so that's what we're highlighting. So it's a way to look at if these potentially damaging hydroxy metabolites are being inactivated via methylation. Now, also in the estrogens section, in its own little subsection, the oxidative stress section, is the 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine. This is a functional marker for DNA damage caused by oxidative stress. And then I also wanted to point out here that there are comments that populate in the neighborhoods. At the end of each neighborhood is a static comment. It's a general overview of the information that was provided in this section. This comment will be the same from patient to patient. However, The last pages of the report will give commentary based on that, on your patient's own highs and lows. These are specific for your patient. Now, I do want to note that anything that is within the reference interval, including low range or upper range, will not receive a comment, only frankly high or frankly low. When postmenopausal women report hormone supplementation, your report will look a little different. Now, you can see that this patient reports supplementing with biased progesterone and DHEA. There are no established supplementation ranges in urinary metabolite testing. In postmenopausal women, hormone supplementation often results in hormone levels falling above the reference interval. The colors in the hormone cascade correspond to tested levels viewed through a postmenopausal lens. Elevations due to supplementation will often be seen, but they're not necessarily alarming. So here we're looking at the progesterone's neighborhood, and because she's supplementing with progesterone, you're able to see how this patient's levels fall, looking through either the lens of her being postmenopausal. So look at the graph, as well as the colors down here on the histogram. But you can also get some information using premenopausal ranges, and these are represented by these little white triangles here. Levels are still upper range for many of these analytes, but not as high as they would be using the postmenopausal lens. Additionally, the premenopausal reference ranges are listed out for you at the end of the neighborhood. Now, the goal when providing supplementation to postmenopausal women is not necessarily to reach premenopausal ranges, but having information about premenopausal ranges provides an additional data point, which many providers find valuable. The white triangles on the histogram correspond to how the hormone levels fall relative to premenopausal ranges. So at a glance, you can see hormone levels plotted using both postmenopausal and premenopausal ranges. Now, I do want you to note that the ratios and calculations section doesn't change. The relationships between these markers is the same, whichever lens is used, and it allows the provider to extrapolate information about enzyme activity. Remember that in the HuMap, colors are important. Red doesn't always mean bad, red means abundance. And there are markers that are helpful if they're found when abundant. That might be a higher ratio of methyl metabolites in comparison to the hydroxy metabolites, or having a higher amount of 2-hydroxyestrone compared to something like 4-hydroxyestrone, which would be problematic if it's red. Conversely, blue doesn't always mean bad. Blue just indicates low levels. So again, markers could be helpful when found in low amounts, things like the 4-hydroxy metabolites, or maybe when that ratio between androsterone and eticalenolone is low, which would mean that the patient is favoring beta metabolism over 5-alpha metabolism. So please keep that in mind when looking at the colors. The clinical team at Doctors Data has created a resource guide to help support you. This is available on our website, and it contains information on how to read the report, FAQs, all the possible comments are listed in the guide, and also information on factors that can influence hormone metabolism. And a quick note about supplementation support, we've created a resource for you called the HuMap Clinical and Therapeutic Considerations. This can be found on the Doctors Data website. You'll need to go to News and Knowledge, Materials and Resources, Endocrinology Resources, and you'll see it listed there. This document was designed to complement your patient's HuMap results and present evidence-based supplementation considerations and influences in several ways. So here you see a comprehensive and expanded view of potential influences, including treatments and lifestyle considerations. These are organized by enzyme. So you can see here our steroid hormone cascade, and each enzyme is given a number, which corresponds over here to the enzyme, and there's information on influences that can either slow down or speed up that enzyme's activity. This chart, also in the guide, provides a valuable reference for simplifying treatment considerations and understanding the potential effects of common multifunctional treatments on hormone metabolism. Based on research findings, it identifies treatments that have been shown to influence multiple enzymes involved in hormone metabolism, and it can serve as a handy tool to assess the potential benefits and any unintended effects of different treatment strategies. The pluses indicates that a substance will speed up enzyme activity, and the minuses indicate that it will slow down enzyme activity. And because hormone metabolism is complex, the rest of this document provides expanded considerations and references. So hopefully whatever you need, we have provided for you. Anytime you have questions about your HuMap report, feel free to reach out to our clinical team. You can call us at your convenience, send us an email, or reach out through the website. We're here to support you. Thanks for your attention.